Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another All in Crypto podcast. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Jesse Whiteside, the business development head over at Hashport. Welcome on board, Jesse. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, and me and you have had quite a few conversations off camera. And we'd kind of come together and said, look, wouldn't it be great to get some of these conversations on camera and out there in public?
Yeah.
Certainly when it comes to things that we spoke about loads of things, but things like Hedera, what's going on with this industry in general, and of course, Hashport. So hopefully we can dive into some of those things today.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. I always like to start with my guests with a little bit about themselves and how you kind of got into the crypto space.
Yeah, absolutely. My story might not be too dissimilar from many other folks that have found themselves in the Web3 space. I came from the traditional finance world, was an advisor for quite a few years on and off, and have seen, obviously a lot of the things that many people are facing out there currently. Went through the 2008 market cycle as well, just fresh out of school as a junior advisor, and got to see firsthand some of the things that have been going on in the space of the traditional finance world. And, on and off throughout the years had sort of seen and heard of Bitcoin and started to look at it, much like many other people, picked it up, looked at it, thought, oh, maybe this, there's something to this, but maybe not, put it back down, then picked it up a few more times. And then around 2017, really started to pay attention to what was happening and actually decided to read the papers and look into things. And about that time as well, also came across Hedera and the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. And up until that point, I hadn't seen the performance and robustness of ledgers that made me think that it was a viable solution. But when I read the Hedera white paper, it changed my mind on that. And so over the next several years, found my way into the space full time, and now obviously here as a permanent fixture.
Yeah, I always say people getting into crypto, there's such an eclectic group of people that are in this space, and they've all got weird and wonderful backgrounds. Like mine is dentistry, for example. It's always kind of like, I think, getting into a swimming pool. People often dip their toe, they might dip it a couple more times, and then they fully submerge themselves. I think a lot of us kind of end up here in a similar kind of manner. What sort of time was this when you were looking into crypto? You mentioned Bitcoin, and then you stumbled upon Hedera at the same time, because a lot of people don't know that Hedera has actually been it's not a new thing in regards to the kind of span of crypto's life. When did you first kind of come across Hedera?
Right around the time that the white paper was released. There's quite a few different videos on there. Mike Baloney on YouTube is typically a gateway for a lot of people. I came across that, as well as Dimitri Kofinas and his Hidden Forces show. And that, coupled with just my own research, had kind of brought me to understand the potential of these networks, particularly Hedera or the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. And so I was basically sold at that point, because the math all checked out, essentially, literally checked out. And so, yeah, it was around 2017. But like I said before, as early as 2011, 2012, looking at Bitcoin and trying to understand, what the media had put out there at the time about it, doesn't give, obviously, a fair or accurate representation, especially in the early days, about what it was. So, if you don't understand fundamentally what it represented, you kind of have a distortion field of information to get across to understand what distributed ledger's value holds for society at large. And it just takes some time. And I think your analogy of dipping the toe in the pools is apt, because that's, people typically, it takes a few interactions or encounters with it before they're like, hang on, there's something more here than just, what everyone else is trying to tell me.
Yeah, and if we can maybe just touch on that, what's really going on here, and understanding the kind of values that I don't want to use the word blockchain because of course Hedera is a DAG, but crypto, what kind of values and what's really going on here? Maybe if we can tap into that a little bit more before we dive into what attracted you to Hedera, and some of the unique properties that you saw with it in adversary with kind of sort of the linear blockchains. So what do you really think is going on here with crypto? What is it offering humanity?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, there's the saying, "Don't trust, verify," which is a sort of a calling card of the Web3 space. Um, I would say that it all does boil down to verifying the trust. At the end of the day, it is also about trust, but it's also about being able to actually authenticate that what you're seeing you can trust. And so I think that is sort of providing the bedrock or background foundation to building new either use cases or reinventing existing ones in such a way that the structure, you can trust it and you can understand it. And I think that's what that tends to have a lot of people gravitate towards this space, is that once you understand that these new technological advancements are legitimate and they actually do what they say that they can do, there are a lot of things that you can build that are of value, not only just monetarily but societally. And I think that's what attracts a lot of people. I mean, obviously there's lots of different reasons for getting into the space, but I think fundamentally, as a society or globally, they hold the promise of being able to trust what you're seeing, reading, hearing, not just from a financial standpoint. And I think as time goes on, especially with the advent of AI and machine learning and all these things that are coming out, that is going to become even more and more pressing for us to figure that out and make sure that we can do that, because just deep fakes and different things and all, not to get too carried away right off the bat, but that sort of thing is coming, and we need solutions to those problems. And I think that's what distributed ledgers, the power of them, hold for society at large.
Yeah, you'd think trust would kind of be a given. We should have trust, right? But in today's society, it seems to be something that's, if we had a graph of, how much you can trust, it's kind of nosediving, and all of a sudden you've got really what I suppose Satoshi materialized, but was probably a concept way back. I know Lehman talks a lot about how Hedera is actually built on an older kind of consensus for a blockchain, for a kind of cryptographic vehicle. I know we can maybe dive into that a little bit later, but yeah, it's very, very interesting as well. You mentioned AI. I think a lot of people haven't even thought about what happens when AI meets the crypto world. I've played around a lot on ChatGPT, and you can literally code up an entire website. So what happens when you can do that with smart contracts, or like you say, with deep fakes? We know obviously WorldCoin. I can hear the boos from a mile away bringing that up. But what they're actually trying to do, not that I'm a particular fan of it, is quite a real problem that they're trying to solve. And that is, how do you authenticate somebody's identity in a world where perhaps deep fakes, we've seen lots of funny ones where I think Henry Kissinger got caught out on one and spoke about some really sensitive information that he probably shouldn't have. It's a fascinating world that we're moving towards, and blockchain, DAGs, crypto definitely has a role in all that. So when you're sort of going through your journey of crypto, Bitcoin, you stumble across Hedera and it starts to make sense. Of course, Ethereum was out at the time then. You had a lot of other coins. A lot of them don't exist, or they exist, but on a way smaller scale than what they did in 2017. What actually stood out to you about Hedera? What made you think, wow, Hedera?
Yeah, great question. As I was talking about earlier, I think performance and security of these networks is of the utmost importance. And so, reading that paper, understanding that Hedera is actually not a blockchain, but it's something called a hash graph. And Hashgraph and all Hashgraph consensus algorithms aren't created equally, but the one that Dr. Baird solved for was very, very robust and performant in such a way that there are unique properties for the Hedera public network and for this Hashgraph consensus algorithm that just aren't readily present with other ledgers. And so the big thing is, transactions on Hedera or on the Hashgraph consensus can settle with 100% finality. So when they do settle, there's no probabilistic finality for those transactions. They are settled and they are 100% immutable on ledger. That's incredibly important, obviously, and especially when you're trying to build, fast-moving use cases that may require understanding, like with immediacy, that something is the way the ledger says it is, and not having to wait for a certain number of block confirmations, etc. One of the other big things.
Let's maybe just explore that a little bit more, because I think that people don't quite. And this is something, I mean, I've been really diving down the Hedera rabbit hole since I've been talking to you. Some of the stuff we've spoken about that we'll talk about on camera, that we've already spoken about off camera, it's made a lot of sense. And you get all these unique properties that a Hashgraph can offer you. And we'll get into maybe the difference between, am I okay to call it a DAG?
Yep. Yeah. Otherwise known as a directed acyclic graph for anyone who wants a mouthful.
Yeah, a mouthful indeed. Yeah, there's many there's many unique properties that a DAG offers that a layer one sort of linear blockchain simply can't. And one of these things is finality. So to kind of expand on that and give a practical example, and you can totally correct me if I'm wrong, what that essentially means is that when you send something or you do something or you execute something, it's instant. It happens then, which is So time to consensus is roughly right now anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds. I believe they actually just pushed a update to the network not too long ago, which I always love when they do that, where the transactional volume on the network, I mean, since January has been anywhere from 500 to 1,500 transactions a second. And by the way, that is more than every other blockchain or ledger combined in terms of transactional volume. And they're doing that, and that's just coming from a few use cases. But all that to say, when they pushed the update, even with that transactional volume, they reduced the time to consensus by, I believe, something like 30% by improving the consensus algorithm, and they're continuing to do performance improvements on it. But it's anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds, and then it's totally immutable. Wow. And if you compare that against other blockchains, first of all, like you say, they couldn't handle that sort of a transaction load. And for them to be sort of getting finalized in that kind of a time period, this is where I can really see DAGs excelling over these other blockchain type distributed ledgers, because there are a list, and we're going to explore quite a few of them during this interview, of really unique benefits that they offer. So you mentioned finality. Was there anything else that stood out to you?
There's quite a few.
There's a lot, but just some.
There is, but just some. The other big thing that Hedera does is fairness of ordering, and this is something that really hasn't come to the forefront in the space yet as being that important. And I think by and large, it has been left off of the conversation around the trilemma, and for good reason, because no other network solves for fairness of ordering. And no one, because of that, they don't even bother to talk about the fact that there are ways to jump the queue, so to speak, with most other networks and prioritize transactions if you would like to pay more to a miner or node. With Hedera, that's and the Hashgraph consensus algorithm, that's not the case. So every transaction is logged immutably with 100% finality as it is received. And they've got a whole bunch, I won't get into the technical details, but a whole bunch of ways to make sure that there's no collisions, et cetera. And they can actually parse through that, which is incredibly important. When you're thinking of at scale global use cases one day, potentially running with who knows, how many billions or trillions of dollars flowing through them, you're going to want to make sure that the system is fair, right?
Absolutely.
That's kind of, that goes sort of hand in hand with don't trust, verify, and being able to trust the network. You need to be able to trust that things are going to be conducted in a way that everyone understands.
In a fair manner, yeah,
in,
absolutely.
in a fair manner. And so Hedera is one of the only ones that does that. It's also one of the only ledgers that I know of that is something called asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant, ABFT for short. Just think of it as basically the gold standard for security of a distributed ledger. You can't really get better security promises from a distributed ledger than ABFT. And so Hedera is one of the only networks in existence right now that is legitimately ABFT. Most other networks can't even promise that they're BFT, Byzantine fault tolerant, let alone asynchronously done. And so that's another thing that really sets it apart. Now, we're talking about these things, and there's all these acronyms and jargon flying around. That is some of the, I think, issue that has come up with people really fully understanding the magnitude of what Hedera can do. Is there, people are trying to get their heads around distributed ledgers, Web3, and the word blockchain, right? And understanding what a blockchain is. Then you throw a completely different consensus architecture in the mix with a whole bunch of crazy different properties that are like otherworldly when it comes to Web3. And you have a recipe for people sort of scratching their heads, and
you lose people.
You lose people. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're to boil it down, Hedera and the Hashgraph consensus algorithm is incredibly fast, incredibly secure, fairly ordered, incredibly energy efficient. So it's actually, I believe it's one of the most, if not the most energy efficient ledger in the world, distributed ledger that is. I think UCL College, University College London did a report on it. And Hedera's, I think, far ahead of even the second closest network, which I believe is BNB chain.
Yeah, could be Algorand.
It's or it could be Algorand. There is a chart that you could probably find after that actually shows all that. But they looked at it, and I think it's to run the network for a year. The energy cost is something like that of a single family dwelling.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And actually, it's so energy efficient that Hedera buys offset credits to make the network carbon negative. So
Brilliant.
it's not only carbon neutral, they're actually taking, or at least buying credits to take carbon out of the atmosphere. So I mean,
it's got a lot going for it. Yeah,
it's got a lot going for it, and because of that, one of the sort of last things outside, like from a technical perspective, that has been decided to be done, which is very, very forward thinking, that I don't think many other networks have also grasped, is most of the network fees are pegged to USD. In fact, all of them are pegged to USD, and because of that, you can, as a business or an organization coming into Web3 or distributed ledgers trying to figure out how you're going to do things, you can actually budget. You can budget how much you have to build a use case out and to run and operate a use case, and you can know how many transactions you're going to get on the network because it's pegged to USD as opposed to pegged to the token price. Most of the other networks, I'm not sure of any other network out there that does peg to USD as well, but most of the other networks peg to their token price. So. Yep. And it's all fine and well to build a POC or a use case in a bear when the token prices are depressed. But what happens in a bull when, the token prices, maybe sometimes 10 or even 100x, well, then your budget is completely thrown out of whack, and you can't feasibly run that. Now, obviously, there's ways of getting around that in terms of like L2s and ZKs and roll-up solutions and different things like that. But you're still sacrificing things when you do those sorts of things. You're sacrificing security or some other thing to attain those reduced prices or fees to operate on the network. And so, at the end of the day, when you look at Hedera as on the balance of the whole, with all of the properties that is offering natively as basically an L1, or even you could argue it is in a way an L0. The breadth of use cases that can be developed with these tools and functionalities is far and away outside of the scope of just simply financial. There are so many different use cases. We can touch on some of those.
For sure.
I think when you have that kind of pliability and functionality and performance out of a distributed ledger, good things will happen over time as people start to more and more people start to interact and develop around it and figure out some great use cases. Right. I
Yeah,
mean, granted, the entire space is searching for that, but I think Hedera's unique value proposition lends itself to creativity and entrepreneurialism that we just haven't even seen yet. That's going to start, coming out the gate.
yeah, Hedera is fit for purpose. That's one thing I like to call it. You know,
Absolutely.
it's absolutely fit for purpose. You mentioned layer ones, layer twos. With a lot of layer twos, it's kind of like you're solving a problem with a potential problem, I feel. And we've seen that in the form of lots of hacks and issues that we've going back and forth. Whereas Hedera, due to its DAG, and maybe this is really unfair to say, but it's almost like a layer one and a layer two. It's almost like a layer one with layer twos natively built into it, because of the difference. And we can maybe dive into that a little bit more in regards to a DAG. Maybe that's not the right way to
Well,
turn
no,
it.
and you're not wrong, and I think the Hedera network hasn't got there yet. But one of Dr. Baird's visions for this is that anyone could basically carve out a piece of cyberspace for themselves. Anyone could create their own ledger or private network. That's one of the other big functionalities for Hedera is, via its consensus service. It's called the Hedera Consensus Service, which, by the way, as Hashport, we leverage ourselves through our validator set. We have 9 validating members. And we can get into that a bit later, but we leverage the Hedera Consensus Service, and the consensus service is incredibly flexible in its application. And so you can run a private implementation of Hashgraph or the ledger, because Hedera is open source. It's been open source, I believe, now for 2 years, Apache 2.0 license, I believe. And so anyone could spin up their own private implementation if they wanted to. And so when we talk about all these properties and we look at all these organizations and how beneficial, a ledger such as Hedera is, well, if you're running your private implementation of it and you can keep all of your client data private, you can only release what you want, but then you can plug into Hedera's consensus service. It's a pluggable consensus. So if you want to plug into the public ledger, the Hedera public network, and leverage the consensus service to submit data to verify whatever data you might have for the public, to everyone to see and understand and verify, yes, they are doing actually what they are, but also bifurcating and not having to put all of your details out there on the public ledger. You can do that. So it's incredibly powerful in the sense that, to your point about L2, it's an L1 and an L2. It kind of is, in the sense that eventually everyone will be able to create their own little mini L2 that's local. And when they do that, the performance goes even higher, right? I know of private implementations that are, and I won't speak their details, but I know of private implementations that are doing some really amazing things, that they're doing locally, over 1 million TPS with 30 to 50 milliseconds of latency. And they can plug into the consensus service for the components that they need at the end of the day for that use case. It might not be running directly on the ledger, on Hedera proper, but they can log the data that they need to log while getting the performance locally that they need to get. And it all just works seamlessly. And so I think that's what we will start to see over time, once people figure out what Hashgraph is and all the valuable properties it holds and everything. They'll start creating their own private implementations, and then they'll plug into the consensus service. And I mean, that consensus service is so powerful that other ledgers could technically use or plug into the consensus service to be able to do certain things that they want to do, or they could leverage it even as a consensus mechanism if they wanted to. I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I view Hedera as, if you were going to build an L2, given all the properties Hedera has, I would view, and I was going to trust an L2 or a sidechain or a rollup or anything, I would trust the properties that Hedera is offering for the ledger over, any other ledger out there, just because of the inherent security and functionality that it holds. And so, yeah, I think that is the next step, is really, getting organizations, institutions, anyone and everyone, once they understand it, and devs, they can spin these up and try them. I think there's going to be some incredibly powerful use cases that come out of it that aren't even being thought of or talked of right now, that people aren't even aware that we needed. Because by and large, a lot of what DLTs and Web3 does, it's going to be, as much as we'd like to market it, promote it, and push it out there, a lot of the use cases and value are going to be behind the scenes.
Yep.
Right. And it's the
Absolutely.
same way, like we're talking on here right now. I don't know what machine you're on. You don't know what I'm on, what operating system, but we're both on a communal software platform that allows us to communicate right now. And it's going to be the exact same thing with distributed ledgers over time. Much in the same way, like what we're doing with Hashport, right? To be able to have ledgers communicate between one another, be able to move assets to and from. And so with Hashport, we are the bridge that connects Hedera to the broader DLT space. We're connected to, I believe it's up to 10 other EVM compatible networks currently, which allows for assets from those networks to flow freely onto Hedera, and or for applications that are being built on Hedera to have their assets moved onto other ledgers and into other ecosystems and communities. And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day, is that interconnectedness. It's going to become more and more important as time goes on. And we can get in more into the details of Hashport and what makes it unique as we keep talking about things. But yeah. I think you're absolutely right. Like L2s, over time, people are going to experiment privately with them, and it's going to be very interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure. Hedera's sort of consensus service. We spoke about Toko a little bit off camera, which is a tokenization platform that is DLA Hyper, I think I'm saying that right, is behind it. They use the consensus service. You guys use the consensus service. This is a whole another element of Hedera that I don't think people have even started really, unless you're in the know like you are, exploring. And just before, I want to take us back a bit to the DAG, but just before I do that, how does Hedera itself actually benefit from the consensus service? Is there any underlying benefit to the Hedera network through people taking it and spinning up their own localized kind of networks, or is it only if they feed the verification back into the consensus?
Yeah, it would be that they feed the verification back into the consensus service. I mean, if someone's running a local implementation, then they're more than welcome to do that. I think at the end of the day, it's more the proliferation of an awareness and use of the consensus algorithm that people, the light bulbs will start to go off. Oh, hang on, I could do this with this. This actually can enable me to do this thing that I've wanted to do. Great. Well, then they're off to the races, right? And once we get the same kind of contingent of developers that are aware of the functionalities and features of what Hedera can do, that there currently is in other parts of the space. And that's another reason why Hedera's moved towards having full EVM compatibility, or equivalence, I should say. And so over time, all the Solidity developers that are out there, they can simply migrate their code just as they would to any other EVM compatible network or equivalent network, with all of the same tools, features, and functionalities. But then they're doing it on a ledger that gives them all of these other unique properties, such as fairness of ordering and ABFT and energy efficiency, et cetera. And so I think there's the long end of the tail that will happen over time, that people will come around to all of these incredible features and functionalities of the network that lend themselves very, very well to creating at scale use cases that are viable. Not only that you could run it, but is it an actual viable operation or business or feature functionality that you can do? I think for a lot of other ledgers, that proposition at scale is going to become very, very difficult. And so at the end of the day, I think that a lot of use cases end up running on whether it's Hedera or not, I can't speak to, but will run on some version of a Hashgraph consensus layer.
Yep, I've got a pretty good feeling about that as well. I mean, I was talking to someone about the capitulation of chains through things like funding, or the technology doesn't quite stack up, what are they going to do? It's very likely that they're going to migrate to things like Hedera, that already have solved a lot of the problems that many of these chains are likely going to face in the future. I want to take us back a bit and actually talk about Hedera's consensus itself, which is, of course, the Hashgraph, the DAG. What is a DAG? Let's just explore that first of all.
Yeah, you put me on the spot, so I'm gonna have to. Hopefully, I do it service. So DAG, otherwise known as a direct acyclic graph, it is a type of consensus service that is different than your typical blockchain. A blockchain is just a sequence of blocks all strung together in a chain, basically, hence blockchain, right? With a DAG, the consensus isn't as linear as that. Basically, there's something that is going on that is called gossip about gossip. And so basically what you have with the Hashgraph consensus is every transaction comes with two little hashes. One of what the last message that someone just sent to that node received, and a message of what the current node is sending along to the next node. And by doing that, you basically have something called virtual voting. And so by sending those two tiny hashes along with the transaction, you're able to, or at least the receiving end of the transaction is able to deduce how everyone else would have voted should they have conducted a real physical vote, because they have basically a chronological history of all these transactions, so they can piece things together. And it's extremely low overhead in terms of the data that's required to do that. And as a result of that, that's how you get the performant nature of the network in terms of the transactional volume, as well as time to finality and all those other things. I mean, right now the network they've currently intentionally throttled the network to 10,000 transactions a second. Obviously, they're not there yet in terms of the volume needing to remove that artificial bottleneck, or at least throttle. But I mean, Lehman's already talked about that there are use cases out there that are developing and things where they will butt up against that over the next several years. And I have no doubt that they will. I mean, the other very interesting thing about the network, because it's ABFT and because of the consensus algorithm, et cetera, they can shard the network, so they can create different geographic regions or implementations of the ledger. And because they each shard runs the consensus, the Hashgraph consensus algorithm is ABFT, fairly ordered, et cetera, all of those features and functionalities will pass across between the shards. So inter-shard communication will become possible while maintaining ABFT, while maintaining fairness of ordering, while maintaining all of these things. And that's what I believe the team at Swirlds and Hedera are working on right now, is being able to eventually do that. And so what that means is, even if you run up against, whether it's an artificial throttle or not, and, say they increase it even more, but even say they were running, at 50, 60, 100,000 transactions on a single shard, well, they can run as many shards as they need, which means the network can scale. And it can scale to millions, billions, who knows how many transactions in the future that you might need to run. And that's where things get very, very interesting. I mean, they start to get interesting even at the 10,000 transactions a second mark, if that is sustained, which I think, even just a few use cases on the network right now are showing you can run, anywhere upwards to 1,500 transactions a second. I think sometimes the network's even spiked all the way up to near 10,000 a second, albeit briefly, but at the same time, it's there, right? They're just, and I mean, the network's just sort of scratching the surface right now with use cases, and there's many, many use cases out there, much of which I can't speak to, unfortunately, but
of course,
that are being built by, governing council members, as well as members that aren't even governing council members yet, that are looking to do stuff. And so when you put all of that together, again, it's just the consensus layer is incredibly powerful.
Yep.
and I think it differentiates itself. It takes time, like we're doing right now, to parse all those details and understand the key differences. But when you do, I think people, especially people in the space that spend the time to understand it, they get the powerful value proposition that the network presents, and the algorithm itself.
I think Hedera makes a lot of sense. The more and more I look into it, we'll come on to the governing council next, because this is, I think, for a lot of people, a very misunderstood sort of section of Hedera, an important section, because they run the consensus. I think you were totally right about what you said about when you throw a DAG into the crypto space, people are already trying to work out what's going on with blockchain and what's going on with smart contracts and layer twos and things like that. People just kind of switch off and go, oh, well, this is, but if people take the time to, and they already have a good understanding of blockchain, a linear kind of blockchain, and then they look at the DAGs and Hashgraph specifically, you kind of go, oh, wow, you can only do this with this one system. And they're coming up with all these wonderful ways to sort of combat the problems that are arising at this point, certainly as the space grows. You spoke about fees. There are other networks that do like prepaid fees, but often not pegged in the dollar. There's still a sort of fluctuating mechanism there. I think that's great. You spoke about fairness of ordering. I think a lot of people don't even realize that that's an issue, but it is. DAGs have a lot of benefits, certainly Hedera's Hashgraph. And let's maybe move on to who consents this network. And what I mean by consents the network is who's in charge of maintaining the network. So with Bitcoin, it's the miners. With Ethereum, it was the miners. It's now the stake pool operators. With many other blockchains, it's the stake pool operators. Who controls is not the right word. Who essentially
we can hit that nail on the head and get into that's
for sure
as well. I mean, the way the network is run right now is by the Hedera Governing Council, and so eventually that will be a 39-member council. I believe currently we're at 29.
29, yeah.
I don't think we've crossed 30 yet, but we might have.
However, that sounds like who number 30 is.
No.
Yeah.
I don't. I have my guesses, but they are comprised of global leading organizations. So, Google, Boeing, Tata Communications,
Dell,
Nomura, Dell Technologies, the list goes on. And they're joining the council to do a couple of things. And the council offers a functionality that many people don't really pay that much attention to, but it is important when you're building a distributed ledger, right? And so having these incredibly well-known organizations with large stature, large brand value, etc., does a couple of things. One, they're putting their hat in the ring, essentially, with doing this by joining the council. They are publicly going out there and putting themselves out there while supporting this network, and hats off to all of them who have been forward thinking to see the benefit of doing this, and want to start building and ideating ideas with the ledger and the power of it. Because of that, you have these well-known organizations that are all holding roughly an equal amount of stake of the network for their validator, for their consensus node, and within a certain banding, I believe that Hedera allows for. Obviously, community members can currently place whatever their tokens are, their amount of stake, because it is a proof of stake network as well. They can put them to a certain validator, and they can fill up to a certain level, and then other validators would need to be selected for that. But by and large, the members that are currently there, they all have roughly equal stake within a few percentage points. Because of that, the network is in and of itself quite decentralized when you back up and you look at the context of what decentralization actually means. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to take it. Like, is it fully permissionless yet? No, it's not. I mean, the governing council is controlling that currently. Is it completely centralized? No, it's not either, because each of those council members with the stake, they're multi-signed to all the other nodes. They can't move their stake around. They can't do anything nefarious with it. They can't even collude with a group of council members to do that, nor would they want to, right? This goes back to the brand values and the the own risk that these companies are taking. They're going to obviously want to act in the most upstanding manner. They're going to have the best interests of the network in mind when they're running their consensus node, and what they do. And so it looks like you got a question. You have a question?
Yeah, no, just to jump in there, I was watching it's from Hedera's official channel, and it was Quarterly Homes, and the CEO was basically saying that whenever she mentions DLT, basically people go, oh, hang on, Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX, fraud, Dogecoin, whatever. And she goes, she will literally show them the governing council, and people go, hang on, there's an element of brand and trustability there with these governing, and the governing council are playing a fundamental role, I think, in the adoption of Hedera. And we'll come into that in just a second. But sorry to interrupt you there. Just on your point about brand image, and why that's important. I think
that plays into part of the security of the network while it is in the process of decentralizing. So there's a couple of other things to sort of touch on in terms of the decentralization factor. One of the things that Hedera again, very forward thinking about all this stuff, has tried to do, best practices across the board. And so when you're looking at that, one of the other risks that crops up is centralization risk of infrastructure. So meaning the servers that you're running on. So, not going to name names, but like certain other networks will, have the predominant majority of their consensus nodes or their miners, et cetera, on a particular infrastructure provider, whether that's AWS, GCP, et cetera. Hedera has taken the approach, again, of decentralizing that as well. So there's only, I don't know the exact quota, but they have decentralized in the sense that only a certain number are allowed to be on AWS or GCP or Azure, et cetera. And then you have other members themselves running internal on their own infrastructure, their consensus node, which further decentralizes the network itself. And then, one of the other big misnomers, I think, is that the network will always remain semi-permissionless or permissioned, depending on how you want to look at it. I mean, Lehman has been very clear. Dr. Barrett has been very clear for the longest time. You can go back a few years. I believe I sent you that video on our path to decentralization that they put out. And, the entire idea of the council was to think of it as a scaffold. Because if you develop a governing council that is decentralized in nature, that is multi-signed to one another, so you can't do anything, that has massive brand value at stake, not only just the stake itself on the network, you minimize the risk, the potential risk of anything nefarious happening while you're in the process of decentralizing, but you also give a chronological history from the genesis of the network as to how it became decentralized and why and where and with whom. And that is something that I believe Hedera can lay claim to, that very few other networks can actually, open their books up and say, hey, this is how we got to where we are. Now, do I know when, things are going to go to trusted community nodes, which I think are supposed to come online shortly? I don't know exactly when. No, I don't know how long that will take, and I don't know how long it will take between that and going to fully permissionless nodes and anonymous nodes. But that is happening. And once that happens, Hedera will be one of the only networks in existence, decentralized networks in existence, that you can sit there and say, I know exactly how this is decentralized. I know exactly what its state is right now. I can implicitly trust this network because of all of these features, functionalities, and safeguards that have been put in place to date. Whereas with a lot of other networks, even some, most notably like Ethereum, like there's a few mining pools or stake pools that control the majority of the network. if they so chose to. Now, I'm not saying they would. It obviously wouldn't be in their best interest or anyone's interest for that to happen. So there is an economic disincentive for nothing bad to happen, and I don't think anything will. But if we're actually looking for which networks are legitimately decentralized, I would argue Hedera is one of the most decentralized ledgers, distributed ledgers in the world already. And not only that, it's transparent about how it is decentralized for anyone and everyone to see. Whereas with other networks, won't go into details, but like you really just don't know how those networks have come to be decentralized, or if they even are.
Yep.
Right, and that does become a problem, especially as more and more value gets placed on these networks, because the incentive to then do something might outweigh just sitting tight and not doing that, right?
Yeah.
And so that they've basically taken that off the table from the outset, and I think that is the right thing to do. And I think it will only pay dividends down the road as people are looking for a performance secure ledger to build on. It just everything is that Hedera seems to do is about best practices and forward thinking. Like I know they talk about the 100-year company. I think that is the right mentality to have in terms of how you're going to architect something for the long term if you want it to last.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the kind of scaffolding idea. And most networks don't start out fully decentralized from a kind of node point of view. So it's the governing council themselves at the moment, the 29 companies that are responsible for the consensus. And we spoke a little bit off camera about this, and you've just sort of gone into a lot more detail. Decentralization is quite a buzzword, and it's quite a word that is completely misunderstood. Whenever I make a Hedera video or an article, I always get a lot of comments saying, oh, well, it's centralized. And I'm just like, whenever I prod that sort of remark a little bit deeper, I say, well, what do you mean by decentralization? Oh, well, there's only 29 node operators in comparison with something like Ethereum that has thousands or whatever it is.
Sure.
Okay, so from that point of view, and Hedera have never hidden this, you can hold your hands up and say, okay, that's true. What part of that? That's a very small part of maybe this whole scope of decentralization. That is, where are your nodes running from? Most proof of stake blockchains have a real concentration in terms of the servers that they run their nodes on, and also the supply of the underlying token that these big stake pools have. Hedera doesn't have that. So it's more decentralizing them in that aspect. So for people to say that Hedera is centralized, it's kind of a half, it doesn't, there's a lot of ways to look at it is what I'm really trying to say here. And I know
there is, I think, and we've been touching on most of this now for the better part of an hour. There's a massive information asymmetry, I believe, in the market. There either a wanton ignorance to it, or just a complete lack of awareness. I think it's both of those things simultaneously. But there is this massive asymmetry of information out there, because by and large, a lot of people still don't know. Like as many strides as the network has made, as many people know about it, there's just as many, if not far more, that don't or haven't been initiated to the benefits, features, functionalities that the network holds. And I think in a world where everyone were to be cognizant of all of the things that you and I both know about Hedera in contrast to other ledgers, Hedera would be on the tips of most people's tongue. It just would.
Yep.
And I think we're just at the early stage. Like the network is almost 5 years in now, and I think that we've just the network's just starting. Like I view it as it's still in its infancy. It hasn't even really taken its first steps in the sense of. And granted, the entire Web3 space hasn't taken its first steps, frankly, because there's no use cases running at scale that are, actually running by an independent organization that's got a fully fledged use case. outside of DeFi and things that people are doing and running, but nothing significant at scale yet. I think that will change in the coming years, and I think the narrative and the view of this information around Hedera will become far more widespread and known. And when that happens, I think there's going to be just a proliferation of use cases and functionality that we haven't seen to date in the space, the entire space. I think that Hedera will bring that to the table. And that's one of the biggest things for Hedera. I know we've talked about this a few times, but like this network has such flexibility and permutation to it that it's not just about the financial aspect. It's so many more things, so many more sectors and use cases, and it's really just the Lego blocks are all there. The building blocks are all there, and it's just a matter of time and awareness. And people are going to pick the network up and love it and start building some really cool things. And I think the space needs that. The entire space needs that. We need, and even if like this is why it's not a zero sum game with any other ledger out there. Like we love all different distributed ledgers, because if one of them ends up being successful and proves viable for certain things, what does that do? It brings more folks into the space, gets them understanding the value proposition of what we're all doing here, and furthers everyone. So it's not about one over everyone else. It's about, just like we're doing here. Again, I talked about it. Like we're on one of these video conferencing calls. It enables collaboration and cross communication efforts and all these sorts of things that we need to have, in a decentralized, distributed manner. And I mean, back to sort of Hashport for a minute. We've taken with Hashport, if I can just touch on it, we've taken Hedera's governing council method in terms of the validator set that we have for Hashport. So there's 9 validating members on Hashport, but they're all very well-known organizations that are all have a vote for these transactions that get bridged across the platform. So we have the HBAR Foundation, Polygon, Galaxy, which is Spencer Dinwiddie's new social media platform that just got released. WorldPay, StableNode, Animoca Brands, LimeChain, BCW, just very well-known brands within the Web3 space, so that there is that visibility and awareness of who is authenticating transactions. I think with interoperability solutions over the past couple of years, there's been something like $3 billion that have been compromised just from interoperability solutions. So I security and functionality go hand in hand, but at the same time, as you ratchet up functionality, you also ratchet up attack vectors. So with Hashport, it's really about security and executing the one thing really well that we can do, which is ensuring that assets remain locked on the bridge as they get moved to and fro, and with as little fanfare as possible. And I think that's sort of what you need. Everything doesn't need to be glitzy and glossy in the sense of what you're doing if it's a fundamental process that just needs to happen in the background. And so, I mean, with that, we're also the platform itself is also working on its own native Oracle service, right? Okay. So called Axiom, which it's working with it's more enterprise focused currently. But I believe WorldPay just announced at Token 2049 that they're leveraging that for their proof of reserves use case that they're currently developing.
Oh, wow.
And so, there's just lots of functionality that I think that the network still needs, and we're trying to also provide that with Hashport, and with our validating members. And over time, I think you're going to see a lot more people gravitate towards Hedera for many of the reasons we've already talked about, but also all of the features and functionalities that you would expect to have on a performance L1, with respect to DeFi, and the building blocks, so to speak, will be there for users to use.
Yeah, for sure. And Hashport is certainly sort of helping that adoption of Hedera with what you guys are doing. And I'd really like to dive into Hashport in a little bit more detail. Sure. It's very interesting because the governing council, I spoke about a little bit off camera about the fact that my brother is in Aberdeen University studying finance. And I'd mentioned that one of the Hedera governing council members is Aberdeen, who I think used to be Simple Life, and they are the largest asset manager in the United Kingdom. The really interesting thing there was I watched an interview, I think it was from Walker Williams, and he had essentially interviewed Duncan Moyer about what they're doing. And it's not just Aberdeen, but every council member. I watched a similar one from Dell, and I believe you sent me one as well. They're all actively looking to integrate Hedera into whether it be tokenization, whether it's DLA Piper's Toko, which is working with Quarter Homes, which I mentioned, tokenize things. It's very... I don't think there's any other blockchains or crypto projects that are in that position, with those kind of players. Before we move on to Hashport, can we talk a little bit about the HBAR token? What is it used for? Where does that find itself in everything?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the token itself is used as a gas mechanism for the network. It's how you pay for transactions. Transactions on the network are paid in HBAR, and it's just basically the fuel for the network. So as use cases scale and as more activity develops on the network, the use of HBAR is required. So it's really just to enable the functionality, and in addition, its secondary role is obviously to secure the network. It's a proof of stake network,
of course.
So the asset, the asset or the token itself needs to be held by people that are validating the network, right? And so that's how you get that trust, that functional trust that you're looking for throughout the network, is by holding it. So it's twofold. It's used to enable those use cases, and it's also used to secure the network.
Yeah, brilliant. And certainly that's going to become, we know with these big brands, they're not likely to do anything to jeopardize their reputation, but you spoke about trusted public nodes and then anonymous nodes, that kind of economic incentive to be true, to be fair, to not be nefarious, it is there. I think that the economic incentive of proof of stake is quite a great design. Is there anything in particular right now, we've spoken about a whole range of things, that's really exciting you, that's going on with the sort of Hedera ecosystem? Is there any one particular thing that you're like, wow, this is, phenomenal? I mean, there's probably so many of them, but just one that you can think of before we move on to Hashport.
Yeah, I just think it's it's the breadth of use case development. It's the applicability across so many different industries and sectors that Hedera lends itself so well to, that I think is very exciting. Because I think, as you're saying, right, like with Toko and Aberdeen and all these other governing council members, which I believe Mance has spoken to. Mance, the CEO of Swirls, that incoming governing council members now have to come in hand with a use case that they want to build. We're beyond the point of just, I saw that. The network's beyond the point of just adding council members for the sake of adding council members, which was great and provided early functionality. But now it's about, well, do you have a use for this? Do you understand, when you're coming in the door, do you understand sort of the way we understand how these things line up in terms of value, and being able to potentially run some really interesting use cases. And I think getting them primed in that way is very exciting as well, because they come in the door ready to do something, right? It's not just something that's an abstract thing that they're like, oh, this is interesting, like let's observe. It's like, no, roll up your sleeves, try and build something, see what comes out of it, because you might come up with something really cool. And I think that's the big aha moment that that I don't think the space collectively has had yet, right? The space at large, as well as Hedera. I mean, the day you get a independent organization building an at-scale use case that either saves them a ton of money or makes them money in a different product line or enables something that they couldn't do before, it suddenly just shifts instantly what you are going to view as the standard for the space. And it also forces other organizations or competitors or peers to reevaluate.
Yep. What is our, on board.
What is our distributed ledger strategy? Because if we don't figure this out, we're in deep trouble. We need to get this done overnight. How are they doing this?
It's kind of like the internet, right?
Yeah.
People needed to adapt, and I think distributed ledgers no different. We really focus a lot on actually looking at every major institution from where I'm sitting is if they're a major institution, they're exploring and have some idea of what's going on. And I listened to someone from Citibank, and they were essentially saying, who recently just came out and said they're going to tokenize their deposits. And they basically said that right now there's a real barrier between the floodgates opening as a result of regulatory unclarity.
Yeah.
And I think that this is one of the big features that is stopping that aha moment right now. Some people are probably going to, maybe do it without the regulatory clarity, but once you get that regulatory clarity, I can't even imagine where this space is going to be. It's just, it's extremely fascinating to think, but I think you're totally right. Could we now move on to Hashport? You mentioned Hashport a little bit. How did you come across Hashport? What's the kind of deal with Hashport?
Yeah, that's how I essentially ended up in the space full time.
Yep.
I was coming aboard to become the director of business development for Hashport. Obviously, I had been very enmeshed within the Hedera space for a very, very long time. So understood the value proposition, understood what they were trying to do, and obviously the value of having a primary bridge to connect to other distributed ledgers in the space. And just, across the board, understood what the value of operating and running this is. And also, if you haven't been able to tell by now, I'm very, very passionate about talking about Hedera. So it just naturally lent itself well to me taking that role. And so, over the past couple of years, we have been working to, increase the ability for users or platforms, dApps, services, anywhere, everywhere, to come onto the Hedera public network for whatever ledger that they currently may reside on. We've had a few instances of that already, where applications that are existing on other ledgers that their use case might not have taken off the same way that they had anticipated or hoped for a variety of reasons, whether that's performance or different features or functionalities not being available to them, like we've been talking about, be it fairness of ordering or security properties, et cetera. We've actually had some of them migrate across using the bridge, and then just recently, one of the platforms, Dovu, it's a carbon credits marketplace for decentralized farmers to be able to cultivate their lands and get rewarded from actually being good stewards of their farmlands. They've just recently reissued their token natively on Hedera after spending the process over the last couple of years of migrating back across. And we think that use cases may end up doing that, or dApps or platforms may end up doing that, for the sense that we're connected to 10 other networks. We're adding new networks all the time, but in having a native Hedera token service token, it's very easy for them then to branch out into other networks and groups of people to expand their platforms, and it's very sort of seamless back and forth, creating the representative token for them on those other ledgers.
For sure.
Back and forth, and having users come back in onto Hedera if they really want to use all the features and functionalities of those platforms. So yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting to be at the helm of being able to do that, and enable platforms to do that. So we're always looking to work with ecosystem partners that need those different functionalities and features of the network.
Yeah, and what networks do you guys currently facilitate? You mentioned there's around about 10. Yeah, now I'm putting you right on the spot.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we'll leave a link to Hashport.
I could go through a lot of them. I mean, there's Ethereum, Polygon, BNB, Avalanche, Optimism, Arbitrum.
Oh wow.
Aurora, Moonbeam, and a few others that we are going to be integrating as well.
Ready for the mass migration over to Hedera.
That's the thing, is being able to enable platforms anytime they would like to come across and leverage different services and functionalities of the network to be able to do that, or to migrate their platform base onto the network. I think over time, given the value proposition of everything we've been talking about, and given that Hedera's pretty much got full EVM equivalence now, there's going to be very little reason not to come to Hedera to try and build your use case, because it's just the most performant network that there is out there.
Yeah, especially like, if you've got a real world use case.
Since January of this year, Hedera has been doing more transactional volume than pretty much every other ledger combined, and that's just from a few use cases. Like it's got the performance robustness to handle these use cases. Outside of the hiccup that happened in March with something that has since been, I believe, patched, obviously, in terms of how the network was. I believe there was a race condition or something.
Okay.
Anyway, all of that has been solved, but the network has never gone down as a result of performance or bottlenecking or an NFT project launching and there being someone trying to hammer the network, right? Or et cetera. So the network is robust and performant, and
brilliant.
And I think as performance as I've seen, with any ledger out there, far and away, actually, when you really boil it down. And so I think it will be one of the places to be, if not the place to be, to build a performant at scale use case moving forward.
Yeah,
again, it's just back to being aware of the features and benefits that can be had to come across and do that.
And I think that's why, I mean, one reason I was so excited to get you, there's a number of reasons why I was so excited to get you on, but one of them was your sort of breadth of Hedera knowledge. You've been around in the space for a lot longer than most. I think a lot of people are now warming up, but I really do think we are going to see that mass migration to Hedera, because it's just fit for purpose. And it really is fascinating to kind of, you mentioned that Hedera's never really had, other than one hiccup, which wasn't really to do with necessarily the consensus. You actually can't even say that about Bitcoin. A lot of people don't know that Bitcoin's actually had a few hiccups in its history that are very quickly swept under the carpet. One was actually a double spend bug that was found by a Bitcoin Cash developer that could have got very ugly if he didn't go straight to some of the Bitcoin devs and get that fixed. So big thumbs up all around for Hedera. In regards to Hashport, what are you guys looking to do moving forward? We spoke about the mass migration. Are you guys looking to bridge more chains? What's the kind of vision for you guys moving forwards?
Yeah, more features, functionality, networks. Obviously, it's at the end of the day, it's about bringing value to and fro wherever that goes to enable more activity on the network. Which I think, to our conversation here, I think a lot more people in the coming years are going to be aware of it and looking to do that. Being able to offer the ability to easily leverage the platform. So we are going to have a few other additional functionalities that we're going to be announcing very shortly that are going to make it a lot easier to, both on the front end and back end, leverage the bridge. Whether you're a DApp or a builder or someone who just needs to leverage the service in an abstracted way. So just being able to lower those barriers to entry for users leveraging the bridge and the services, I think bodes well for obviously bringing in more users and volume to the network. Obviously, working with enterprises and council members with their given use cases that require an Oracle service, leveraging the Axiom Oracle. That's going to be another area that I think is going to become more and more prevalent. There are several other, outside of the WorldPay use case, there are several other use cases that are being developed with that Oracle service in mind. And so I think over time, those things will be announced once people, or obviously once it's appropriate to do so. But I think that is going to be, that's one of the pieces and components that has sort of been missing in the ecosystem by and large, are Oracle services, because that obviously holds together a lot of other use cases and functionality for other networks, which I think ultimately Hedera will have just, the same abilities and functionalities that all the other networks do. But then that'll obviously garner more interest and attention for building on the ledger once that does happen. So it's really about doing the things that we've already been doing and expanding out features and functionalities where we can to add additional value for users. Our tech team, shout out to our tech team. Our tech team has been absolutely great at adding continual value to the platform throughout its history. They've added a complete metrics page for the platform, searchable transaction histories, all sorts of very, very good creature comforts for users wanting to migrate. Block confirmation counter for when you're coming from other ledgers and you need to wait for those blocks to confirm.
Nerve-wracking.
To be relatively certain that your transaction has been successfully brought across. Just stuff like that where it really helps users out and lowers the barriers to entry. Because at the end of the day, it's about balancing out that information asymmetry and making it as easy as possible for users to find the network and come into the network, because that ultimately leads to further adoption and development on the network.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one thing, me setting up a MetaMask for my grandpa, it's like there's a poltergeist in the room. It really is quite an experience. But you talk about UIs, you talk about things need to be easy to use for people to use them. People don't like doing things that are hard, and I think Web3 is going through that kind of renaissance, and you guys are certainly well ahead of that curve. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a link to where you can find out not only your own socials, but also everything to do with Hashport, because I think it's going to be key, certainly in what I'm sure me and you both believe is going to be quite a mass migration over to Hedera. And I'm certainly dedicated, and I know you are, to really sort of, I don't really want to use the word educating, but getting the word out there on Hedera, because it is nothing short of impressive, fit for purpose. And we've only touched on some of the things. I want to really emphasize that. And I'm going to have to get you back on, Jesse, for a part 2. I can already tell. There's so much more going on here. And these little facets of things that we've just briefly touched on can be expanded on to orders of magnitude from what we've sort of dived into in this video. So Jesse, it's been a real pleasure. The last thing for me to really ask you to do is to give people some advice on where they can find out about yourself, where they can find out about Hashport, and anywhere you want to direct them before we love and leave you.
Yeah, absolutely. If users want to use the bridge and come across to Hedera, it's just hashport.network. Same for the Twitter handle if they want to find us. If anyone wants to reach out directly across the messaging for Hashport, they could do so. If they'd like their platform or token integrated, or they'd like to discuss features and functionality, we're always open to collaborating and working on things. So happy to discuss anytime with anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to have to get you back on, certainly with the updates that are going on with Hashport as well. Jesse, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that we finally got this brought together, and I'm really looking forward to getting you back on very soon. Thank you very much, Jesse.
Pleasure for having us. Thank you.